come and spend a little time and learn what's going to happen with our community, I assume, with our blessing, right? With our blessing, right? We're going to bless this. I'm Amber Falpetcher. I'm the chair of the Cape Fear Economic Development Council, and those of you who are not members, we encourage you formally to become members so that we can continue to get the word out about what's happening in the region, offer a little more transparency and direction for a sustainable Wilmington, if you will. I am going to hand the mic off to Bill Graham. Mike from Bill Graham, who's going to do the introduction here tonight. I do, if you did not sign in when you came, please sign in when you leave.
Sign in.
But sign in. Thanks very much.
It's a special pleasure for me tonight to introduce Glenn Harbeck. The reason for that is, first of all, he runs most of the city, as far as I can figure out. He's Director of Planning, Development, and Transportation. That isn't really much. So he's a very important guy in the overall scheme of things here. And he's been around for a while, which I consider a very good thing for the job that he has. He did a tour here some years back when he was in the planning department, senior planner. And then he ran Glenn Harbeck and Associates for a good many years. And when you do it yourself, you develop skills like outreach and communication that you have to master in order to be successful. And Glenn learned his lessons very well and brought all of that back to us when he returned here in 2012 to become our Director of Planning, Transportation, and Development. And what you will observe about Glenn, besides being thoroughly involved and knowledgeable about the subject matter that he brings to us, comprehensive planning, that covers a lot. It is also that he's always listening, he's always learning, and he's always curious. I've had the pleasure of seeing him here for meetings in the past. We've also had him at Waterfront Task Force meetings. We've had him at forums as well, and never disappointed that Glenn is a serious, competent guy. It's actually a pleasure to be with as well. So I'd like to bring Glenn Harbeck up, and his degrees have helped us. We have the Alliance for Cape Fear Trees as part of my Renaissance Wilmington Foundation. And he's a regular attendee at those functions because he cares about it. He has a background in landscape architecture, as well as planning, environmental studies and landscape architecture at Syracuse, and his master's in city and regional planning from UNC Chapel Hill. So he knows what he's talking about. Glenn, it's all yours.
Let me say, I didn't give any information to Bill. As is customary on things like this, usually they ask for a little brief paragraph bio or something like that. He does his homework. I mean, as far as he exaggerated all these wonderful things, but as far as the gist of it, he's a pretty cool researcher. Thank you for having me here tonight. I feel very at home here. I think I probably have made the acquaintance or good friendship with probably a third of you here this evening, and so it's easy for me to talk with friends. What I want to cover tonight are really two things. One, a quick overview of the city's not too old comprehensive plan, and then talk about how that comprehensive plan has a foundation for changes to our city development code, which is the DNA of our city. And it would be, I could launch directly into the development code, but it wouldn't make sense. If you didn't understand what we're trying to achieve with the comprehensive plan, any changes to the development code would be like gibberish to you. So, hope you'll be patient with me. When this is all done, I did bring, for those of you who are millennials, this is a bookmark. I brought these with me. This is 500 pages in 40 square inches. And it's a way of trying to summarize in a very brief way what we're trying to accomplish in the city of Wilmington as we undergo a tremendous period of growth. So, with that said, let's just talk. Bill mentioned I had done consulting for a quarter of a century, and I remember working on the Outer Banks of North Carolina years ago, and there was an impression of the long-term residents, the year-round residents of Hatteras Island, for example, that they felt as though the county's planning initiative was to cause growth. And that is not at all what planning is all about. Planning is about managing the growth that's already coming your way. And we have a lot of growth coming our way because Wilmington and Hanover County and the region around us is a very attractive place where people want to live. So we're not about causing growth or stopping growth. We're about just managing what's coming our way. So that's what that quote is all about. Planning for growth doesn't cause growth any more than planning for retirement causes old age. And that's not an original one, that's one that somebody shared with me years ago. First, I want to talk about a few facts about what's happening in our region, because there are some significant changes. I'm speaking to the choir here as far as what's going on. By 2040, if our projections stand true, we expect to see another 50,000 to 60,000 more people just in the city of Wilmington. That's not in the county, that's not the Wilmington area, that's just the city proper. We think, we won't know till next spring when the census is done, but we think that we've probably got about 120,000 people in the city. I believe we were about 102 10 years ago. So that's pretty significant growth. And the region, you know, going from 300 or about 400,000 people up to about 700,000 by 2040, that's only 20 years away. These estimates are probably low now, but over the past 10 years after the Great Recession, we've probably approved, sometimes it's hard to get specific numbers, even like hunt them down in the New Hanover County Building Inspection's office. We've probably approved 2,000 at least single-family homes in the city alone, and no less than 6,000 multifamily housing units, which is an issue in and of itself. And it's conservative to say that we have another 1,500 to 2,000 in the pipeline right now, because there's quite a few projects that are currently in the process of development, but haven't appeared on the tax rolls, haven't appeared in any accounts anywhere. They're just under construction. The kind of growth that we're seeing, just by way of the budget office of the city, I get these numbers. We have witnessed a significant, depending on how exactly you measure it, somewhere between 18 and 20% increase in the city's tax base. That's not my job as a city planner. I don't care about the tax base, I care about managing the growth of the city. But a side effect of that growth is an increase in the city's tax base, which allows us to pay for expensive waterfront parks, for example, if you've been following the news. And that's an expensive situation that is affecting all sectors of the county, both public and private sector. I'm hearing here from the home builders, and the cost of contract labor and the cost of materials is driving up the cost of this budget to try to help these days. This was a number that came out in May of this year from the state. It basically is saying that Wilmington, among all of the major urban areas in the state of North Carolina, is going to have, by their projections, the fastest growth rate for jobs of any urban area in the state of North Carolina through 2026. Now, why they picked that time frame, I don't know, but that's what we're told. That's a greater percent increase than Charlotte, Raleigh, etc. Now, will they get more larger raw numbers? Yes, because they're bigger areas, but percentage-wise, we're going to be going faster than anybody else. And I'm not saying that good, bad, or different, I'm just saying that's the way it is. So the questions that we ask ourselves, that all of us in the room could be asking ourselves, is given this kind of growth that we've been experiencing and that we anticipate is going to continue, how are we going to find places for people to live? Where will they work? And where their places of work, what impact will that have on commuting patterns and traffic impacts? How will they move about the region? And how can the city and region accommodate that growth with the limits on our roads, our water and sewer, our schools, etc. Those are all big questions that, huge questions that require a lot of attention from a lot of different people.
Then could I just ask people to step forward and take seats, fill in up here.
Oh, yeah.
Some of you standing in the back, there's no reason for that. Harper, why don't you come on up? And nobody likes to sit in the front pew, right? But you can see this much better if you're up here, so especially if you can't see very well. Please
Also,
come on.
Glenn, if you could speak up a little bit more. That'd be
Oh, okay, I'll try. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Come on up.
In other words, how can we best plan the neighborhood? All right. This is the city's comprehensive plan. It was selected in 2016, and I can say this because my staff prepared this plan. I didn't prepare the plan. I'm very proud of my staff. But that plan received the highest award among all 500 municipalities and all 100 counties in the state of North Carolina as the best comprehensive plan in the state of North Carolina. And it truly is a very, very good quality plan. And the trick is, how do we make it happen? How do we abide by the principles of that plan? And the Land Development Code is one of the tools that we use, that we'll be talking about in a minute or two. It's one of the tools that we use to make that plan happen. We do look at best practices from a variety of standpoints. So we're looking at people who are involved in home building, people involved in parking, people involved in affordable housing, people involved in finance, et cetera, accessory dwelling units. The most recent best practices around the nation in terms of zoning practices. We try to do our homework. At the same time, take all that national perspective and bring it home to what works here in Wilmington, which might be something quite different. So we have to listen to both what's going on nationally, but also what's going on in Wilmington itself. So here's the bookmark. And before you leave, I want you to take, each of you take this bookmark with you, because it will come in handy if you ever read a book. But seriously, people ask me if you were interested in presenting a development to the city of Wilmington, to the Wilmington City Council, and you were seeking their approval of some type of development. The principles contained on this simple bookmark would get you a long ways in satisfying what we as a city are looking for to try to make our city grow without causing other problems, and grow in a positive way that everybody can benefit from. So let me back up here. The bookmark has 10 things on it, and to take 500 pages and boil it down to 10 items, that was my challenge. So for this presentation here this evening, I'm just going to talk initially about those 10 items, and then after those 10 items, I'm going to talk about how that translates into specific changes in our DNA, our development code. So each of these 10 items begins with a quote, and then there's a recommendation. So the first quote is, when I have to drive 2 miles on College Road to get to the grocery store, I'm not stuck in traffic, I am traffic. All right, these people will ask us quite a bit, why do we need a grocery store on every corner? And my response to that would be, bring it on. Because the more convenience we have to our grocery stores, for example, the less time we have to spend on our few major streets clogging up our arteries. If we can find, for example, and I don't know how anybody feels about this, but I think one of the best things that's happened in the southeast corner of the city in recent years is the Aldi grocery store at the corner of Waltmore and College Road. And the reason why that is such a success story is that prior to the construction of that store, there was not a single grocery store on the east side of College Road between Greenville Loop Road and Monkey Junction. And there's hundreds and hundreds of homes back there that have to drive on College Road or perhaps Masonboro Loop Road to get to a grocery store. That loads up our roads unnecessarily. If we can bring groceries closer to where people live, or people living closer to where there are services, the less impact that growth has on our traffic situation. So that's a real win-win. So the first recommendation is bring people closer to services or services closer to people. Not a new concept, by the way. People sometimes say, what is this picture of down here? That's a picture of probably a 1940s or 50s vintage corner store, mom and pop store. The notion of having services closer to where people live is not a new concept. It goes back, 80 years. So the new Publix that adjoins Pine Valley, for example, all those people who live in Pine Valley can get to that Publix without ever having to get on a major road. Okay. All the people on the east side of College Road that can get to that Aldi, those are big benefits. Really helpful. So item number 2. Oh, not sorry, got a little sidebar here. Contrary to what most people might think about building a city, density is not the problem. The problem is separation of uses. If we have people living in Hampstead, or living way south of Monkey Junction, or living in Brunswick County, and they're coming into Wilmington for jobs, that's the challenge on our roadways. Truthfully, we don't really have a problem with traffic moving around the inside of our city. What we have a problem with is commuting traffic. If you think about it, in the mornings, the traffic on College Road coming into the city, the traffic on Market Street coming into the city, the traffic on the bridge coming into the city, those are our points of congestion, and that's what they call bad congestion. Believe it or not, there's something called good congestion. Good congestion is when you have a lot of economic activity associated with traffic. And the classic example of that, an extreme example of that, would be Times Square in New York City. How many people have ever tried to drive through Times Square, or been in a taxi trying to get through Times Square in New York City? You can walk 10 times faster. That is good congestion, because the amount of activity going on there is a tremendous economic boom to that area. But the traffic that's coming up College Road in the morning, or the traffic that's coming in on Market Street in the morning, that's bad congestion, because there's no economic activity associated with it. They're just trying to get from point A to point B, trying to get to work. And how many people shop on the way to work in the morning? So this is significant, that our biggest challenge is bringing services closer to people, or people closer to services. It's a huge deal. Back in the days when the concept of separation of land uses came out, we had noxious industries, smoke spewing, fat rendering plants with odors. Well, that's a thing of the past. We don't have to have that kind of separation of land uses like it once did. Next item. This is a quote from my city traffic engineer, who's a very nice guy. We have a chance to talk to him. It takes on average 7 years to plan, permit, and construct an additional lane on a roadway. It takes about 18 months to fill it up. That's something in the planning world they call it induced demand. In other words, people don't measure their commuting by distance, they measure their commuting by minutes. So if we were to build, for example, another lane on Market Street, and we increase the capacity on Market Street, all of a sudden people will flood Market Street as opposed to some alternative route, because that capacity is there. And developers who are not dumb people, they're very smart people, God bless them, they'll recognize that capacity is there too, so they immediately will build in locations that take advantage of that capacity, and that also fills the road capacity. So it's kind of a vicious circle that the construction and widening of roads is not always the best solution. It's usually about, there are better ways of doing it. We can only stand so many transportation bonds, and the taxes associated with those transportation bonds, because it's not necessarily the most cost-effective way to build a city. So number 2 is promote mixed-use development. And you know what? We're sitting right in the middle of it. the best example of successful mixed-use development is downtown Wilmington. We've got jobs, housing, shopping, entertainment, and I hope that we'll soon have a grocery store. But I think that's coming, because grocery stores follow rooftops, and I think we're getting a lot of rooftops downtown, which is where they can be, where they can be absorbed effectively without causing, we don't have traffic problems between downtown and 16th Street. Our traffic problems begin at 16th to the suburbs. So, anyway, another quote: the most admired cities in the world, the ones everyone wants to visit, spend time, and perhaps make their home, are dense and walkable. And we've done a pretty good job as a city promoting density, but we've got to do a better job about promoting walkability. If all we do is promote dense housing developments out scattered everywhere, that is a recipe for heavy, heavy traffic impacts. However, if we can promote density near services, near jobs, near shopping, near grocery stores, that is a winner. That's a winner for everybody. So the number 3 recommendation is, encourage density, but not just anywhere. There's a reason why bees make beehives the way they make them. There's a reason why a lot of things in nature happen the way they have, and we need to look at our city from the standpoint of where is density most appropriate, where do we have water and sewer in place, where do we have parks and schools available, where do we have school capacity available, and where are there assets that we can build on. So, next quote: remember, for every bicyclist you see on that path, there's one less car competing with you for asphalt. Somebody on my staff acknowledged that to me one day. I thought, well, that's a good perspective. My neighbor passed away a couple of years ago, but he came up to me one day after the transportation bond had passed, and he said, "Why do we have money in the transportation bond for building bikeways? I don't ride a bicycle." Well, I don't play tennis anymore either, but I still support city's efforts to build tennis courts once in a while. So what you find with bikeways, multi-use paths, whatever they are, the more you build them, the more synergy there is, and the more they get used. So the notion of if you build it, they will come, it works, but it accelerates as you start connecting paths, as you start building paths that connect with each other and provide options for getting around town. You will see accelerated use of those bicycle paths, but you got to start somewhere. So number 4, make walking and biking real options for getting around, not just recreation. This little deal right here, shown in this picture and shown over here, my mother and father in World War II had a red and white grocery store, and everybody came to the store using one of those things. And it hung on our garage wall for my entire life growing up in western New York State, and I never knew what it was. There was no purpose for it. We were in a suburban house. And now I know that you can go to, you can go online and get one of those carts from Walmart for about $19. You can go home to some at Albany now. My daughter lived in Washington, D.C. A couple of years ago, and they had one. They never went to the grocery store except using that cart. Here, I don't know if anybody in this group, Ozzy and Harry, have thinking about going to a grocery store. And this is the proverbial goat path. If you drive around the city and you see the goat path along the road, that's a pretty good indication of a sidewalk or a bikeway is needed there. And so we hate to see people pushing strollers over bare earth and roots and all that stuff. So we've got a ways to go. The developed country is not a place where the poor have cars, it's where the well-off use public transportation. So the recommendation there is build so that public transit can improve. Now, wave transit's been in the news a lot the last week or so, right? There's a perspective that somehow we need to be subsidizing the bus system, but all the gas taxes we pay at the pump are not subsidizing road construction. don't have to necessarily subsidize our wave transit system through taxes or subsidization payments, but we sure can help it by building a city that concentrates development along trunk line bus routes. Does that make sense? If we know that there's a bus route that's going to be going down Market Street, down Wilmington, and it hasn't changed in 20 years, and it's not going to change in another 20 years, when a petition comes into the city looking for a place to build more density that is not automobile dependent, we need to be looking at our bus routes and saying that's what we need to be putting or our bicycle paths, you know, where people have an option rather than just getting in the automobile. The best way to preserve the countryside is to build a better city. I gave a presentation this morning to the Wilmington Tree Commission and to the Cape Fear Alliance for Trees, I guess last week. And it's important that people understand that if you can focus more people living in a compact area like the city of Wilmington, that if it will relieve the pressure on the hinterland, if it will relieve pressure on development in more sensitive coastal areas, that's a win. That's a win-win situation. If we know that we have to accommodate 50 or 60,000 people in the city alone, not to mention Ann Arbor County or Brunswick and Pender County, if we can have that development happen in a compact area where it's walkable, bikeable, convenient to services, we can build a better city and preserve the countryside, so to speak. And I hope that makes some sense. So number 6 is build and rebuild where services and infrastructure are already in place. You know, generations of Wilmington citizens have supported the creation of streets and sidewalks and water lines and sewer lines and police stations and fire stations and on and on and on. And it's to our advantage to try to make the best use of that infrastructure that we already have. And people say, well, the city's 90% developed. We're going to build. Redevelopment. We have so many. Drive around the city of Wilmington and look at the properties around the city of Wilmington. And Dave's Petrino, I've been having a conversation with Cameron over there. Dave Petrino is a particularly favorite person of mine because he is seeking out undeveloped sites, vacant sites, sites that they're grossly underutilized. It may be an old warehouse site that's just being used for storage now. And he's actively seeking out places where he can take those underutilized sites and think about it with one. I like to think of an example of. There's a couple of them, more than a couple, there's hundreds of them. But as you go out Worcester and you're about to go over the bridge to Brunswick County, there's a property there right on the corner of 3rd. It would be the northeast corner of 3rd and Worcester. It's been sitting vacant for decades. Decades. And there's a great opportunity. It's a gateway to our city. And that's a great opportunity for some sort of significant development. The area behind Burger King, as you come into the city of Wilmington across the bridge, we greet people with a Burger King. That is the second, in my mind anyway, that is the second most significant gateway to the city of Wilmington. The number 1 gateway in the city of Wilmington would be where? Northside. 40. Northside?
Okay.
I-40 to College Road. Yeah. I-40 to College Road is probably the number 1 gateway into the city of Wilmington. Number 2 gateway is the bridge coming from Charlotte. And that's what we greet people with when they come across that bridge. So there's significant opportunity there to do something really spectacular. And there are some good things happening. We have this what do you call it? Solar panel company that's coming in and build their Cape Fear Solar Systems. You said that? Cape Fear Solar Systems. Thank you. That's going to be, if it pans out as it's proposed, that's going to be a wonderful gateway fixture at that location. Most of our major streets in town were designed as racetracks with parking lots flanking to the left and right. And you don't have to look very far for that. The poster child for that is the Kmart property. Okay? Not a stick in that parking lot, not a tree. Set way back off the road. Hopefully we'll see that move forward with a new project in the not too distant future. But there are lots of other examples of that around our city that can be redone. So the number 7 is build complete streets. That's kind of an odd expression. A complete street? What does that mean? You know, a complete street is you put the asphalt down, you're done. A complete street is a street that's equally welcoming to both vehicles and pedestrians. So for a street to be complete, you want to see, yes, the accommodation of vehicles, but you also want to see sidewalks, street trees, street lights. In commercial areas where you're shopping, maybe buildings pull up the street to create a sense of place. On-street parking to provide protection and you know the advantage, everybody think about the advantage of on-street parking? Why would on-street parking be an advantage over an off-street parking lot? Anybody have any thoughts?
Yeah, because when I'm walking on the sidewalk, I'm buffered from traffic by the parked cars.
Yeah, that's one advantage. That's one advantage. What else? Anybody else can think of in terms of the amount of asphalt we have in our city, what would be the advantage of on-street parking versus off-street parking?
It's hot, because you have to use less asphalt, so it's less carbon intensive.
The end result is you don't have that heat island, you don't have that heat in the community. But what I'm itching at, what I'm trying to get at is, when you have on-street parking, the travel lane, and think about Castle Street, for example, or think about North 4th Street. The travel lane is doing double duty. It's carrying cars down the street, but it's also providing a travel lane to get into a parking space. When you build an off-street parking lot, you are creating special travel lanes in addition to the street to get access to those parking spaces. So you're building a whole lot more asphalt that you wouldn't have to build if you can develop with on-street parking, just like it's been done for 100 years. Not for everybody, it's not for everything, but it's good for some things. This isn't my attempt at humor. Everybody has to laugh at this. In eliminating the need for the front porch, it's been said that General Electric did more to destroy the South than General Sherman. So the point there is that the air conditioner brought on, in part, among other things, the demise of the front porch. We no longer had the need to get out on the front porch with the fan and the tea or the lemonade and meet with our neighbors and get to know our community because we retreated inside the house to the air conditioner. And if we did go outside after that, it was usually on a backyard patio, which you don't meet anybody back there except the family. So the culture of the South and the ability for a neighborhood to get to know each other was impacted by the advent of air conditioning, as well as some other tastes for big sprawling lots and lots of grass to mow and things like that. So number 8 is build safe, and this is significant with regard to our cost of our law enforcement. Build safe places with eyes on the street. The safest streets in the city of Wilmington are the streets that have eyes on them. And I don't mean police eyes. I mean front porches of homes, and I mean businesses, shopkeepers, restaurants, people who are just naturally looking out on their sidewalk, looking at their street, and understanding what's going on out there. And that can diminish the need for constant additions to our police force to try to keep up with things. If you have people naturally, what's Neighborhood Watch all about? Neighborhood Watch is all about looking after your own neighborhood by observing. And the way in which you build the neighborhood can facilitate those observations. Getting near the end here. There's 2 more to go. Cultural and recreational facilities are what separate the average city from the great city. And we are doing that as a city. If you think about the kinds of things that we have in our city and the things that we've tried to keep up with in terms of, for example, we recently had the addition of the Wilson Center. How many people have been to an event at the Wilson Center? I expected this crowd would be heavy into the Wilson Center. You're all great people. informed, educated thinkers who care about the community, you're going to care about the Wilson Center. But we've also got things like Bailey Hall that we've preserved over many years, and so on and so forth. And the voters of the city of Wilmington voted for the Parks and Recreation bond, which allows for the construction of more park facilities. And even the one that's suffering from some cost overruns on the Royal Water Park. But so number 9, make sure cultural and recreational facilities keep up. We can't grow without employing that growth to benefit our community and the culture of our community. Lastly, I'll get to it, 2 alternative quotes. The first one is from the 1970s, I believe, and it was a comment about Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles, California was the first truly terribly congested, sprawling city in the United States. And so the comment from the 70s was, there's no there there. There's no downtown Wilmington. That we have a there there. In Wilmington, we have a there. And it's downtown Wilmington. And then the second quote, which is the alternative viewpoint, which I hope we will all, in this room, I think everybody would appreciate. You can fall in love at first sight with a place as well as a person. And I fell in love with Wilmington 40 years ago and chose to make this my home, even though I traveled for 30 years. I still like to come back and sleep. And what a blessing we have, and that's why so many people want to move here, because it is such a great place to live. Number 10, respect, enhance, and restore what makes Wilmington unique. And certainly we have some great things that are worthy of preserving and protecting and extending. So that's the comprehensive plan in 10 points. And with the remaining time that I have, I'm not going to go through those points again, but I will make sure that everybody gets one of these fancy bookmarks. This is the way a lot of our streets look now, and this is what the way we would prefer our streets to look, and we've got great examples of that already in place. We just want to extend it. Whether it be through redevelopment or whether it be with additional new development. So how does this play into the Land Development Code? The Land Development Code is, like I said before, it's the DNA of a city. All of us look a certain way because of our DNA. We turned out a certain way because of our DNA. The Development Code is a document that's yay thick, and it talks about everything from building setbacks and trees and curb and gutter and driveways and building heights and all these different things, stormwater, it goes on and on, which is necessary if you want to have a community turn out with some semblance of quality. And so I throw all these squares up here to give you an idea of all of the different dynamics and issues that a development code addresses. And when I presented this to the Board of Realtors some time ago, I asked them to identify something, one of those squares out there that we could just yank out and ignore. And they were hard pressed to identify even one that they would be willing to just ignore and not have some DNA influence on how things turn out. So now I'm going to delve in my concluding remarks, just some examples of some of the things that we're thinking about possibly changing in our land development code to try to fix some things that are broken and hopefully not fix things that aren't broken. Missing middle housing. Again, does anybody know, anybody know where this?
It's my street.
McCray Street.
Where is that?
McCray Street.
Right.
McCray Street, thank you. That's my favorite housing development in the city of Wilmington. Do you
There's
live
one
there?
for sale right now, I think.
Okay. Do you have any idea when that was built?
1920s?
Yeah, something like that. That is higher density residential development, townhomes, in the midst of a single family area, and it fits perfect. It is, and that's where the leaves off the trees. It's just a gorgeous little development. Little front porches, picket fences, addresses the street, eyes on the street, walkable to downtown, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now this one down here, anybody recognize this one, where this one is? That's Fourth. That's at Fifth and Fifth and Worcester. That's the Pearl by Dave's. And Dave's done a wonderful thing of getting that project to fit on that site and try to enclose the space as you're traveling on Worcester Street headed out of town. You now have a feeling of space there as opposed to just, empty lots. So Dave is a master of missing middle housing. Well, what is missing middle housing? Missing middle housing is neither single-family residential development on large lots, nor is it 300 apartment units all in one parcel. It's these middle-sized properties that don't cause all the consternation from residents, don't overload any particular location of a lot of traffic, just contribute to the economy of the area in which they're located. Oftentimes they're located in an area that could use some more disposable income. Dave's like a one-man band, creating opportunities for, in that case, it's mostly young people that work downtown that have a nice place to stay. Interestingly enough, in the basement of this, it's built on a slope, in the basement of that development there's underground parking, and Dave has placed hanging racks next to each parking space for bicycles. And one of the things I'm big on is there's been a proposal on the books in the city of Wilmington for many years to create a bicycle boulevard out of Fifth Avenue because there's just not that much heavy vehicular traffic on Fifth Avenue. But there's a great opportunity to just by paving it smoother and striping it, you could create a vehicular lane close to the median and a bicycle lane in the existing travel lane on the right. And all those people live down there at South Front Street Apartments. The tribute companies, the managers are doing wonderful things down at South Front Street Apartments in that area, Satellite Lounge, the retail area down there, Greenfield Lake. We're leaving them out, hanging them out. They need some, we can help them even transform that area. And they're not gentrifying that area, by the way, they're taking use of empty buildings. But if all those, if you ever get a tour of Front Street Apartments, you go to that one room, you see hundreds of bicycles in there. Those people that live there, and they're mostly young people, if they could use those bicycles and go up Fifth Avenue to the breweries on North 4th Street or downtown or whatever, what a great connection. Not only that, but it would be a great connection between downtown and Greenfield Lake. So anybody living in the historic district or vice versa could take advantage of that. So we want to encourage missing middle housing. That's going to require some heavy thought on our part as how we can incentivize that. Interestingly enough, the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota recently removed single-family zoning from their zoning districts altogether. So does that mean that they don't still allow those to exist? Yes, but they don't really want to see more single-family development because it just consumes a lot of land. So I won't go into too many details on this because I know we need to get to questions and answers. I know we've had a couple of questions along the way too, and I appreciate that. Speaks for itself. I don't think anybody can read that, but get it to move. Oh, I'm losing the battery here. What is this? Here we go. Clarify and improve tree preservation, removal, and planting standards. As I said, I gave a presentation to the Cape Fear Alliance for Trees last Thursday. I gave a presentation to the Wilmington Tree Commission this morning. Trees, at the recent city council election, trees have been front and center. Not only trees, but trees were a big issue, believe it or not. So we're looking hard not at radically changing our tree preservation and removal of planting standards, but we're going to tweak them to try to make them a little bit more effective. So we do want to treat our trees as an essential part of our infrastructure. Trees are no less a part of our infrastructure than sidewalks and streetlights. If you're going to make it comfortable for a pedestrian to walk from A to B, those trees are important. And so we really want to view that not as a nicety, not as an aesthetic improvement, but really part of the infrastructure of our city. We do want to work on canopy trees as opposed to crepe myrtles. Sometimes that's easier said than done if you have overhead utilities. We're sometimes limited to trees that don't go more than 25 feet tall, for example. But we really do want to focus on true canopy trees wherever we can. I won't go into too many details. We've had situations where somebody came in on a redevelopment site where there were no trees to save. And I was looking at the ordinance in Durham, for example, and they have a different approach to tree protection or tree preservation. And it wouldn't work in the city of Wilmington because it doesn't really acknowledge. And I talked to the planner there, the planning manager, and he said it kind of disincentivizes redevelopment. And we don't want to disincentivize redevelopment. We want to encourage quality redevelopment. So, too much to go into. Development review, we want to eliminate or narrow the scope of the subdivision review board. That probably means more to the development community than it would mean to the average citizen. We have what's called a technical review committee. I'm not going to dwell on this because it really is not a mainstream concern. But we don't need to have a subdivision review board and a technical review committee doing the same job. So we're going to try to assign as many duties as possible from the existing subdivision review board to our technical review committee, and I won't comment too much more about that. There's different things that can be done in different ways. I really am. Big one. I was having a conversation here. Was it Scott? Or I forget who it was. Yeah. We were talking about accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units, fancy name for garage apartments, mother-in-law suites, granny flats, healthcare units, things like that. Anyway, we in the city of Wilmington supposedly allow accessory dwelling units in our zoning districts, and we do, but then we kill them because we put all these added requirements on them. You have to have a lot and a half or an extra 5,000 square feet. Well, how many developers design a subdivision where all the lots are a lot and a half? It just doesn't happen. So we've got to look hard at our requirements and remove those poison pills, because if I want my mother or if I want my kids to allow me, or vice versa, or a single mom with a child or a college student or whatever, to have an affordable place to stay, this is a way to do it. This is an easy way to do it. It doesn't cost, there's no land cost. There's a beautiful home going up right now. I think it's on 6th Street between Chestnut and Walnut. Some folks are building a brand new house there, and they got an accessory dwelling unit in the backyard. It looks beautiful. And that's providing for affordable housing for somebody. And there is a supply and demand curve on housing. And that's a great opportunity. And I would hope that if and when this ever reaches City Council, that some people in this room would come out to that meeting and speak on behalf of accessory dwellings. And we have a very good person in back here who's very knowledgeable about that subject. So some advantages of it: it can address affordable housing, it can allow aging in place, and it can actually help the owner of the principal house actually make the mortgage payments. So there's advantages on both sides. Introduce a form-based code. I won't dwell on this either. Basically, a form-based code, if it had been in existence 150 years ago, it would have created downtown Wilmington. A form-based code is a code that cares more about whether the building fits in with its neighborhood, its context, rather than what goes on inside. And if you think about downtown Wilmington, we've had buildings in downtown Wilmington. At one time, they were an office, they've been a retail, they may have been a restaurant. It really doesn't matter what they are inside. It only matters, does the building fit on the streetscape? So a form-based code cares about the form of the building, not what goes on inside. And so we want to start out, it avoids repeated rezonings. Every time somebody changes from a restaurant to a medical office or vice versa, they've got to come back to council and get approvals, and that's kind of a redundant exercise. So we would talk about applying it initially only in the CBD where it's a natural fit, and then as people get used to it, we can expand it and make it available outside the city. Sidewalks and street standards, that's kind of a no-brainer. When we did our comprehensive plan in 2016, the #1 priority across the entire city was more walking and biking. And so we can honor that. And we are to an extent with our transportation plan. Right size the city's parking standards. This is an interesting one to me. I'm geeky. But we just completed a study. Some of my staff went out and did an inventory of all the commercial properties, not all of them, a lot of commercial properties, the big ones in Wilmington, and found out that we're 42% overparked. That this is a picture of Kohl's, for example, Kohl's department store, and that's typical. Now, historically, we planned for our parking areas for the Black Friday after Thanksgiving. And do you really want to design your city to accommodate the parking needs on one day of the year? And now with the advent of the internet and so much online shopping, even Black Friday is not the big deal that it once was. So what we're finding is that we don't need to be requiring so much parking. It gets back to that heat island, that extra heat coming off the asphalt is unnecessary, and the stormwater runoff that goes into our streams and our coastal areas, polluting our coastal areas, and it's really not necessary to have that parking. So we're going to relax our parking standards to a point, I call it right sizing, so that we won't have these enormous amounts of asphalt over the city. Okay, this has already been done. We had a redundant exercise where we were having special use permits going through the Planning Commission to the City Council. State law says that the meeting with the Planning Commission was irrelevant. It's like a hearing, and you can't have two hearings deciding the same case. So we've already done that. Getting near the end here, improved mixed-use districts and the CDMU development type. We have this thing called CDMU, it's been abused, we're going to fix it. Opt-in mixed-use workforce district, this is something that kind of came to us. The tribute companies, the Maynards, approached the city about their willingness to provide workforce housing, 10% of their total units, in a particular development on a military cutoff, or make a payment in lieu into a dedicated housing fund that could then be used to provide gap financing to help pay for affordable housing somewhere else. And so that's something that we're working on very actively right now. We're hoping to bring that forward to the Planning Commission in January. And it would only be under a voluntary basis. State law does not allow communities, at least in our opinion, to require a developer to provide workforce housing, but if the developer wants to do it voluntarily, that can be arranged. Improve the city's street frontages. This is not the best example, but you can see there's a street frontage here, right next to it there's another street frontage, side by side. One's a little better than the other. And we'd rather see Wilmington's major streets a little bit better looking. Okay, the LDC is the DNA of the city. That's what it looks like when it's embedded in all the other city codes. And these are the different articles. It's a very, very complicated thing to work on. But we have some good people in my department who are working on it every day to try to get it drafted out. timeline, I'll conclude with that. We're working on the drafts right now. We hope to, starting in January, we hope to roll out certain sections of that code, whether it be on parking or whether it be on trees or whatever. And then there'd be public input, public work sessions, and then of course it all has to come to public hearings. Thank you very much.
So there are obviously a lot of questions I'm going to start with. I'm going to hand these out. You answer questions. How's that? Okay, great. Tom, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Yes, sir.
So it's so very encouraging to hear that our region is going to lead in job development over the next 10 years. The large question is, what kind of jobs are going to be created? Are they baseline jobs, or is there anything that can be done with the LDC to encourage a lot better kind of jobs than we have right now?
I know that's a subject that's of particular interest to this group. I appreciate you raising that issue. As I recall, when I reviewed that report that came from the state, they didn't just look at job growth, but they looked at the types of jobs.
Quality of jobs.
The quality job. And the report was encouraging. We are seeing, at last, a moving needle where we've had situations for the last 20 years where it was very basic salaries for kids coming out of college. And the study, if you go in and go to the State Department of Commerce and look up jobs projections in North Carolina, you can read the report for yourself because it identifies jobs growth by sector. And it is encouraging. I'm not saying it's a panacea, but our needle is moving. Thanks for that question.
Yes, ma'am. In the orange.
A question about it. As long as I've lived here, it seems like many of the ideas are wonderful, but something happens in the implementation. And I wonder what your ideas are to try to help implement what is being proposed. I mean, one of the examples, you were just talking about how important the gateways are. And yet, what do we have on the corner of 3rd and Dawson, the new storage unit?
Right.
Ugly as can be, and you visit it twice a year. You know, why is that not workforce housing? How do these things keep happening? Or we have a special use permit and then a developer's lawyer says, oh, let's make it 3 stories higher. We have a secret agreement or whatever. And all these things seem to happen that distort the plan. Why do they happen?
That's a very good question. And I would say to you that the short answer is we're operating under a land development code that is from the 1970s. And so storage units, for example, are permitted use in that particular commercial district. If it's a permitted use in that district, we can't do anything to prevent it from happening there. So that's why we need to change our land development code to make sure that particular uses go where they're less visible like that. Although I must say, I'll counter your argument a little bit. The reason why we have so much demand for storage units is because we have so much multifamily development that doesn't provide enough storage. And our focus on self-service storage is what does it look like from the street. So if you look at some of the new storage units coming in, they're landscaped, they have a brick building facade, they have a pleasant entryway. We're really focused on what is the image of that property from the street. Even the one that you're referencing there at the corner of Dawson and 3rd, you notice that's 2 stories. That was something that was done about 2-3 years ago by City Council, so that when you do have these self-service storage units coming along Dawson, which is a gateway to our city, that they have the image of a real business enterprise as opposed to just a flat, 1-story storage place. So we tweaked that at the edges, but we're not there yet.
Over here, please.
Yeah. Are there any plans for light rail?
Funny you should mention that.
What was the question?
Are there any plans for light rail?
I don't use the term light rail, I use the term streetcar or trolley. But one of the ideas that I have brought to the attention of our city is the relocation of the existing CXS freight line out of the city of Wilmington where there are virtually no customers, to a more direct path into the port, and then repurpose the existing, I call it the St. Louis Arch on its side. If you think about where the wheel goes in the city of Wilmington, repurposing that arch for an intra-city trolley service. And since the corridor's already there, there's no bridges to build, there's no property to acquire, it would be a much easier, I say that with tongue in cheek, a much easier proposition than a lot of these similar transit systems that have been built elsewhere. And we brought a very talented young man by the name of Aubrey Parsley on board as the city's rail realignment director. This is something that's serious enough for city council that they were willing enough to hire somebody. And this guy comes out of the offices of New York Southern Railroad. He has worked in their strategic planning group in property dispositions and acquisitions. He understands rail, he talks their language, and he knows what motivates them. He's a bright, bright young fellow. He's an engineer, civil engineer and a systems engineer. And he's really an interesting fellow to listen to. So yes, the city is very much motivated to try to provide that as an alternative form of transportation. Talk about affordable housing. Any homes that within a quarter mile of that track wouldn't have to own the 2 cars or the 3 cars. Maybe 1. Maybe none.
Wilmington has been spared, if that's the right word, the innovations in bicycles and scooters that have been coming across the country and around the world. And you had some very good things to say about bike paths and good things to say about Fifth Avenue. But what we're seeing around the world, as you travel in Spain, you go to Barcelona or Madrid. If you go to Canada, you go to Montreal or Quebec, you see bicycle cities. And they're not the extreme, that would be Amsterdam.
Copenhagen or Amsterdam.
Copenhagen, yeah. Those are cities that really advance. And it isn't because they've had a historic bicycle infrastructure in all cases. Most of the cases, it's been a post-World War II deliberate strategy to deal with the parking and transportation and pollution issues that are otherwise unmanageable. Like your example of build 1 more lane, 8 years and 18 months, it's eaten up. They're going just the opposite way. The complete streets strategy shows us, when we see these places, bicycles going in 2 directions in 1 lane on the road, and many more one-way streets.
Yeah.
And by doing this, they are saying to the car drivers, forget about it. We just simply cannot allow unlimited use of cars. And in Barcelona, an experiment that they started there is about to take over the city, quite literally. And we could do these things here without 8 years of waiting. They're taking 3 block segments, a square, and they call it a super block. And only urgent traffic or real necessary traffic can penetrate that area. First place they tried it, the reaction was very negative until they got it. When they got it, they said, my God, it's like having a park in our backyard.
There's a time for everything. That was actually done in Wilmington in the 70s in front of the Cotton Exchange.
Too soon.
Yeah, we weren't quite ready for it yet.
Brett first, sorry.
Yeah, Glenn, we live in Wilmington, we vote in elections, we pay Wilmington taxes, but we're basically less than a mile away from 3 breweries, 3 grocery stores, multiple restaurants, the Arboretum, the Early Gardens. I have to drive to every one of those places because Oleander and Eastwood are essentially walled to pedestrians. There's no way to safely cross these streets or travel on them.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, because you showed the pretty pictures. Everybody loves 1945 Wilmington. But all the annexation areas between 1945 to the beach, it's all these arterials. How can you do complete streets, walkability, the median project in Market Street, when it seems like DOT is a horrible collaborator? Car to Market, not a good node. It's taken 2 years, and it's ugly as ever. So how do you deal with the vision, when you have DOT to deal with on Oleander Market College, which were all the horrible examples.
That is true, and I don't know if I have a simple answer for that. Certainly, they talked about, for example, a pedestrian bridge over College Road for UNCW. Personally, I was a college student once, I question whether a college student who knows they can never be killed, they would rather take the chance of crossing a grade than take the time to go up and then down and then back down again. And if it's handicapped, go over and back and over and back. But the alternative is to try to change the signal timing at Randall and College Road. Don Bennett, my traffic engineer, will tell me we'd have traffic back up to Rocky Point if we try to get any more capacity on the through movement going north and south of College Road. It's a tough question. The best thing I can say is having central median landings does help. For example, getting across Oleander with no central median landing, that's a recipe for death. And we've had some.
I have three. Bonnie?
I guess I'm kind of adding on to the conversation a little bit here, but Glenn, you and I talked prior to coming out here, you doing your presentation, about you're looking at actually kind of setting up the land development code with a perspective of downtown, 1945 group, and then outside of the 1945 group. Could you expound on that just so that people are aware of that, and then how you're going to get input for those land development codes?
Yeah. Okay, one at a time.
Very briefly.
Yeah. The city of Wilmington is not the same everywhere, and that's what you're trying to say, Bonnie. The way I look at the city of Wilmington, there are actually four different types of areas in the city of Wilmington. One area is where we are right now, the central business district. There's no place like it. It is a unique area unto itself. The second area is the 1945 corporate limits, which is basically the grid system of the city, where you have streets running east and west, north and south, and it's just square like a waffle iron. That's the second area. The third area is what I would call really the suburban context, which is outside the 1945 corporate limits all the way to the intercoastal waterway. And even within that, there's variations. But then there's a fourth area. There's a fourth area which is kind of unique. Those are areas like Mayfair and Autumn Hall, possibly the Galleria site. And they're like a smaller community center cluster in the midst of a suburban area. So that's the fourth category. And so one of the things that we would like to do with our new land development code is to try to recognize the difference between those four areas. And the classic example is trees. If you look at the tree conditions out by the intercoastal waterway compared to downtown Wilmington, they're not even in the same world. It's just a totally different environment for trees. So we're looking at trying to customize the treatment of trees relative to those four areas. We'll see where that goes.
Thank you.
And then the second question you had was about how we'll get input. Starting in January, we'll be releasing significant sections of the code, a subject matter at a time, to allow everybody in the community to comment on those, as well as make sure council's informed of what they are. For example, I think one of the ones that's the most ready to go right now is our historic preservation districts. I think, and the reason why they're ready to go is because we're not planning on changing much. We do have a new set of design guidelines which are coming up for use by the Historic Preservation Commission, but technically that's not really involved. But that will come out probably in January, and then in February, who knows, it might be trees, it might be parking, it might be something else. But we're council has told us, don't drop this thing in our lap all at once. We don't want to be overwhelmed. We want to be able to chew on it in bite-sized pieces and allow the community to chew on it in bite-sized pieces as well. So thanks for the question.
Glenn, when you we're certainly blessed with a 300 plus or minus year city here, and it's its own unique thing. Where do you look for other guidance, other cities that have done it right, might be a couple steps ahead of us in terms of redevelopment? Where do you look here in Europe or wherever?
Yeah, we do have some benchmark cities. I was having this conversation with somebody just this afternoon about benchmarking. And the difficult thing about benchmark is sometimes you're researching the status quo. And frankly, if we have a comprehensive plan that was selected as the best of all 500 municipalities in the state of North Carolina, and the best of all 100 counties in the state of North Carolina, maybe people are coming to us, asking us, how are we doing it, and how are we going to convert this into our land development code? But that's not, I'm not going to do this, I'm praising my staff. But I am saying that there are, certainly we look to Asheville, we look to Charleston. Where else? You might suggest something. If you're aware, Greenville, South Carolina. Yeah. Up and coming. Very, very well done downtown.
Freshman?
So you talked a little bit about the rail earlier, and I kind of want to build off of what you guys have been talking about with walkability and planning for sidewalks and things. What I didn't hear in this was about the infrastructure and how we're doing planning for infrastructure. Can you kind of speak a little bit about that? But also, I kind of am interested in understanding sort of like how far out are we looking at when we start doing the planning for things like roads and other parts of our infrastructure, because 60,000 people as residents in 2040 is a lot. And that's only half a year. So when we start adding an additional however many 100,000 or whatever for summer, summer visitors, either for the weekends or staying, more longer term, that's a lot. So what are we doing to kind of look at some of these major congestion areas and start doing that planning now to make sure that we're not having to do all of that and try to catch up?
Right. In my mind, the single greatest thing that we could do as a city is to follow through on that rail initiative, because that's going to allow tens of thousands of people to navigate in our city without getting in a car. And it'll be able to take people from UNCW to downtown and vice versa. You realize that the existing rail line, the existing CS rail line, right now, where it makes that bend out there by Cinema 6 or Cinema, whatever the movie theater is out there by Car Avenue, that's only about a half mile from UNCW's campus. There's opportunity there, tremendous opportunity to have all kinds of transit-oriented development adjoining that line. And when these parents come to town looking for a place where their community college student or their UNCW student can live, there's no automobiles density anymore, none. They just find a place within a quarter mile of that line, and they get on that line and ride downtown, or they can go to the university, or they can cross-matriculate to the university and the community college downtown. Also, just for the average couple, if you can just get rid of one car, the American Automobile Association right now, the estimate on what they used to call a sedan, nobody's building sedans anymore, but it costs on average about $10,000 a year to sustain a car in the United States. When I talked about this to the board of realtors, they said, you can get rid of one car and put $10,000 in your back pocket, now you've got money for a mortgage.
I have 3 questions right here. You were first.
Well, part of the problem I see is how the state doesn't go along with us too well on things. On Worcester, there are no sidewalks. On Dawson, there's sidewalks on both sides. On Worcester, there's no sidewalks, and you see people with their children or their groceries. But the state owns that road. Yeah. And they are being cooperative about putting in sidewalks.
They're cooperative in this way. If the city is willing to up the ante and provide the money to build the sidewalks, they'll try to squeeze them in.
And
But they
how
don't
many
pay for it.
millions are we talking about for that?
It's not too expensive. I don't know what.
And that's what stops some of the progress and the people moving down there is that one road with no sidewalks.
Well, fortunately, there are roads parallel to it, that do have sidewalks.
Castle, but you've got blocks in there and people with groceries and kids.
I hear you. I hear you. You know, Dawson was never intended to be what it is. Dawson and Worcester were selected when they built the bridge in 1969. Dawson and Worcester went from typical 60-foot right-of-ways, 32 feet curb-to-curb streets to what they are today, which are one-way pairs. And that was a result of the decision to place the Cape Memorial Lift Bridge where it is today. So that's...
Okay, we have 3 more questions. Harper?
Just a quick comment. Glenn has been my mentor for 30 years, and he's younger than I am. I still can't figure that out. It's hard to have a discussion, Glenn, without including the county. I consider the city county like a Siamese twins with 2 different attitudes, going 2 different directions. And all of this is great, but if we don't get together with a comprehensive unified plan between city and county, not great expectations, that's all.
I appreciate it. It is a challenge across the state of North Carolina, and for all I know, across the country. I've probably worked as a consultant in half of the counties in this state, and whether it's Orange County and Chapel Hill, or Wilson County, or Winston-Salem and Forsyth County, even where they have a joint planning department, there's always this friction between the municipal government and the county government. And I don't know what it is. Goldsboro and Wayne County, tremendous differential between what the city does, Goldsboro, and what Wayne County does. I don't have an easy solution. You're the politician, man.
Are you an elected city council member?
Yeah.
I don't have Nancy.
We're looking at you.
That's a good answer. I like it. I haven't started.
Wayne, you take a question?
I think the senator kind of took my question, which is, you look at the picture of the traffic, and a lot of the traffic coming in is coming from outside the city limits. And I'm impressed with, I have a city background, and I'm impressed with everything we've seen here. But frankly, a lot of your problems need to be coordinated at the county level. My question is going to be, how is that going right now, if you're willing to answer that? And what can we all do to help improve that on a county level? Because it's tough to find where the city ends and the county begins other than...
But there are clear distinctions. You know, the city can't own our streets, and we do. And we can build streets, the county can't. Under state law, the county is responsible for schools, and we're not. The county is heavily involved in social services, much more than the city. The city is very, very motivated toward walkability and multi-use paths and biking. The county, for whatever reason, because they don't own the streets, I guess, it's a difficult proposition for them. So, a more difficult proposition. I am having conversations with the county planning director, hopefully next week, so we can get back together again. And you know, we had since the comprehensive plan was adopted, our previous county planning director left, and we have a new county planning director. So I need to spend some more time. We need to talk about those kinds of issues. Ultimately, the buck stops.
That's all, Kevin, no problem. Okay, Laura, the last question.
My husband and I just retired and recently moved to Wilmington, and I wanted to address the walkability issue.
Where did you move here from?
Blowing Rock.
Then why did you come here?
Well, our daughter lives here, and we grew up in Charleston and spent the last 35 years in the mountains. We moved here because we wanted urban living, and we weren't looking at anything other than living right downtown. But what we're finding, being retired and all, number one, you take your life in your hands crossing 3rd Avenue. You know, even if you go to the designated crosswalks, people haven't gotten the memo that they're supposed to stop when you're in the middle of the road. You know, so it's dangerous. And lack of street lights. There are not enough lights in the evening to walk and feel comfortable walking from downtown home without a mileage cap. So between the access from one side of Third Avenue to the other and streetlights, have other people brought this up, and are there plans to do something about that for all of the hordes of retirees that are coming here because they want to earn as well? And we have to be able to walk around the city.
Yeah. You can't imagine how many discussions I've had with Don Bennett, our city traffic engineer. He's a very, very, very intelligent traffic engineer. When he goes to meetings and he talks, everybody in the room stops and listens. We're very fortunate to have Don. He will tell you that the hardest job that he has as a city traffic engineer is not designing the layout of the roads or the curves or timing the signals or managing the control center with all the 27 live feed cameras. The hardest job he has as a traffic engineer is driving this changing driver behavior. And so it's a constant effort. If you notice around town, you're seeing more and more what we call speed minder signs. They're effective for a period of time, and then they wear off. And we try to, now we're starting to add some blue light flashers on them. Subtle reminder as to what could be the consequence if you speed. We started out with that, I think, one speed minder sign on a trailer, and now we've got like 14 that we position in different neighborhoods around the city for periods of time. We know that if we leave them there forever, they're going to lose their effectiveness. So we put them in temporarily, and then after a time we move to another neighborhood, and move to another neighborhood. They're constantly on the move about every 3-4 months. So we're trying everything we can to try to change that driver behavior. But it's a tall order when there is a spirit in Wilmington that says, I'm free to do a...
Well, isn't that also part of this is a state highway, it's Third, right? It's not a city
It
road.
is. The section of
So,
Third Street...
Go talk to Harper.
Yeah, the second, that's a good point, yeah. The section of Third Street from Market Street down to all the way down to the beach is a state road. The section of Third Street from Market Street north to Isabel Holmes Bridge is now a city street. When we spent $11 million 5-6 years ago to do all those improvements on Third Street and the new bridge next to the Wilson Center, we accepted then that street into our system. Now we're responsible for maintaining it. But now that we own it, we have the opportunity to do things with it, with the signal timing, with the sidewalks and the street crossings. We can do things there that we couldn't do before.
You don't have to stop like for, what is it, 6 blocks?
Yeah,
We're just gonna stop.
Yeah.
You gotta have something.
Well, and the street lights are.
Street lights are important.
That, who do we talk to about?
Ann Street at Third?
All the way from downtown.
Well, just more street lights in the downtown area, not lights.
The interesting thing about streetlights is they're mostly, now if you drive down Market Street tonight, you'll notice that we have what I call pedestrian scaled streetlights with the globes,
Right.
and they're down at pedestrian level and they light the pedestrian pretty well. But most of our streetlights in the city of Wilmington were installed long ago when they're what I call cobra head lights. They're these, reach out lights, and they're up among the trees. And so we love our trees. And there's a conflict between those old cobra head streetlights up high in the tree and the trees. So the short answer to your question would be, if we could ever afford it, we would love to see those cobra head lights converted to something more pedestrian friendly.
It's new tax base, sounds like we got it coming.
Yeah.
So we have a couple few little business things. First, I want to thank Glenn so
Thank
much.
you for having me.
Afterwards, we only can have this space until 7:30. So if anybody wants to help us put chairs on top of chairs, we can get out of here faster. And we have 3 other things. Thank you, Harper, for being here. Kevin, thank you for being here. We appreciate you guys coming and hearing and listening, so we have a chance to talk to you. And if you're not a member, please talk to Bonnie, because she's right there, about membership. And our next event is going to be probably late January. It's probably going to be dealing with public transportation. So we would really like to have you. Thank you all for being here tonight. Have a good evening.